Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're middle of page 1248. Yesterday and the day before, I did a pretty comprehensive summary of the last 10, 20 pages. And now, Rabbi Rashbi is summing up and tying together the key points regarding the highest level of the yichud, that in addition to the contemplation of bina and the resonating vision, truth, and clarity of chachma, there's also the yichud of chachma and bina, which he began discussing, what he called the yichud acha naila b'fnei atzmai on page 1236. And in that yichud, there are levels. There's a yichud chitzeni, an outer form of union of chachma and bina. That's when bina is more involved with the emotions, with its young, tending and nurturing them. And then there's a yichud pnimi of a abba ve'ima, or another way of putting it, calling zivuga shalom, a complete union. So zivuga she'ena shalom, he explained on page 1241, he explained the zivuga de loy shalom is when bina is not b'shleimus kemasa and not in its full height and its full stature, which means not the atzmis of bina, only the way bina relates to the banim, to its children, to its young, aim revetzes ala frechim, as it hovers over the chicks. And then it's not makabel from the atzmius of Abba, from the core of Abba, because they're not in the same status, they're not in the same stature. And then Abba Vima are not receiving from the Shin Ayin Neherin, the 370 energies or lights of the Metzach of Arich. Only from a lower level of the face, not the Metzach. Whereas Zivuk Shalom is the union of Bina and Chachma is completely such that Bina and Chachma stand in the same stature, and Bina is receiving from the etzem of Abba of Chachma. And how does that come about? That come about as a result of Ima, Bina, contemplating and refining and tending to the emotions. Then the emotions, in a sense, repay Bina. That's not the right word to say repay, but it definitely says clearly that then the emotions themselves, as they have matured, they draw and lift Bina back up, as he called it here, Aliyav Agba Ba'mech and Liyav B'chinas Atzmis Mamish. Like someone who's involved with their Chachma and Bina into something that's Negei B'nefesh. Their very existence is dependent on it. And that's the higher level of Bina, and that's the Yichud Pnimi of Chachma and Bina, which Yichud Pnimi Davin, that Gili Kameshu B'Chachma Nimshal Gam came B'Bina. As we discussed yesterday, that resonating truth of the higher truth of godliness that is also drawn into Bina, and by an effect, as we said, that's Istaklus B'chinas Ponim El Yenim, Tnein Tapuchim B'chinas Mitzcha, all the levels of how Chachma and Bina gaze at and draw from the energy of Arich and Atik, and through the Aveda, Mechol Meidech, Mamshichim B'chinas Mechin de Gadlus B'zah, B'chinas Gadlus Abba. Yeah. And as we learned, then it goes both ways. The Midas feed the Mechin, and the Mechin in turn also draw it into the Midas that they should become, as he said, Teikif Ha'ava B'Yeser, that the love of B'chol Meidecha should also become more intense. So B'chinas Midas Meir Behem B'chinas Gadlus HaMechin de Abba, and he says that's the Kavana Primish Shebemeich Yeh B'Gili Gam B'Lev. That's the last line we learned. So now you have this total fusion and seamless connection between the entire Nefesh Alekis. Both its mind and its emotions have come to a state of maturity that the emotions have been lifted to a level that is what we called earlier sichlim, but even higher than that, because the midas now are feeling the very, very core connection to God that they cannot live without it. That in turn informs the seichel, the moichin, to go to its atzmius, to its core role, which isn't just to understand things, but as we discussed, to experience something greater and higher. And they both have their quality, as we discussed as well, what moichin does and what midas does. Midas essentially is a relationship. Moichin is not a relationship. Moichin is an experience of the mind traveling to places that are beyond the subjective nature of the person. So when you have them both together, you have the full integrated connection, the full integration necessary to have a relationship with the Eibishter. The midas without the moichin would not have that capacity to reach such high levels, even though they're rooted there. And the moichin without the midas don't have the full experience of something that's negei benefesh, that your very life is dependent on it, because moichin doesn't think that way. Generally, intellect is more cool and detached. And yes, because of that, it can lead you to great high levels, but the experience of it, the experience in the context of a relationship, you would think that the subjective emotions and the reflective and objective mind would have two different realities almost. But the goal ultimately is that they join together, each one contributing their role. It's like I said yesterday, almost like the difference between Meichin being more like Ur and the Midas are more like Kalim. And that's what it does say in some places. Some places, the Arizal interprets Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'garmu echad, which refers to the Atzilus, that Chayu is Meichin and Garmui is Midas. The Alter Rebbe interprets it Eris and Kalim. But the truth is it's also Meichin and Midas, because Midas are more Kalim and Meichin is more Eir. Because Midas is where the experience happens. Ultimately, the goal is that God wants a relationship with us. And a relationship is connected to Ava, not just to Yedaita Hayim, not just to Yediyah, to know God, but to love God. But to love God properly, and not just on an immature level, and also not just on a basic natural level, but on the highest possible level, you need to have the mind. And in turn, the mind needs the heart. So bottom line is they both come together. And now, he said, Gadlus Abba, the Kavana Primi Shebemeach, which carries, and Chachma carries the kernel of the God's intention, like we gave the example with building a home, that is now radiating also belev in the emotions. And of course, that's a chiddush because the emotions generally are on a lower level, even though they're more passionate and they're more relationship oriented. But now you have the best of both worlds. Okay. So that sums up what we learned up till yesterday.
The Bina needs the Chochmah, right? Even in the high Zivug or Shlim.
You asked me yesterday, of course. Without Chochmah, there's no Bina. You need the spark to lead to Bina. And Chochmah has the quality of the resonating truth of Hu Levade ve'ein zulose, like he says in Tanya, chapter 35. Now, I was just going to look. I saw that Yecheskel posted some questions. I want to just see if I should address them here. Oh, yes. I had asked yesterday, where does it say that the root of Midas is higher than Meichin? It says at the bottom of page 1242. So thank you for that. And there Taka says, the Sheshim is L'mayla M'sheresh HaMeichin. And Taka the Midas, that's where the Midas elevate the Meichin to the higher level. Yeah, right in that beginning of that topic there by Ibur Sheni. Yeah, good. Just one more second.
The Mir is making a change in Chokhmah also, or only in Bina?
It doesn't specify. It says in Mechin, so you have to say in Chokhmah and Bina. On page 1242, he says clearly, Chokhmah and Bina, both. Yeah, because it's rooted higher than Chokhmah and Bina, even higher than Chokhmah, The answer is both. I thought it wasn't specific. He does specify. Sorry about that. He does say it specifically. But it's more apparent in Bina because Bina was involved. Remember, Chokhmah never descended to be Revetzes ale Freichen. The father, Chokhmah, never goes down and hovers over the chicks. That's the mother's role. So in Bina, it's much more apparent that it goes from that state to Atzmi's Bina. In Chokhmah, you can say, like he says, Hamischakim b'dover hanegeya le benafshe. So when the Midas are now fully alive and elevating Bina, they also elevate Chokhmah to its highest possible level. Okay.
According to this, how is it Zivugai who Shlim? If the Chokhmah is going higher, is the Bina still low?
Zivug Shlim is when Bina is getting the full intensity of Chokhmah. The Chokhmah and Bina stand, Shavim became Masan. I think you got to learn it again and again several times because it's clearly stated here. Zivug Shalom means when Bina is not involved with the Midas and is going down toward the Midas, which is Chitzenius Bina. It's Atzmi's Bina as it stands side by side with Chokhmah, and both of them gazing at Arich and the Hamshach of Atik. So Bina and Chokhmah, Bina, he just said these aces. He says, within Bina you have that Bina also appreciates not just the details of the understanding, but also the resonating truth of Chokhmah is also radiating in Bina. I discussed this yesterday at length, what the difference between Chokhmah and Bina is, and the difference in their aliyah. Okay.
Can I ask a question? Is it when Bina slaps up and then it gets involved with Chokhmah, is that a time thing, or it was a simultaneously also the down on the Midas? I mean, is it all? It's like a whole thing happening at once, or is it either there or here?
It's stages of maturity. I mean, a person that's, let's say, 5 years old cannot be on this level. When a person is a more mature adult and they've gone through all the stages of growth, it's called maturity. I mean,
but at the same time, she's the mother of the chicks, the mother of the chicks, and
Well, the chicks, when they're younger, is earlier. When they grow older and they mature, is later. So if you're talking about the physical world, yes, it's in time. It happens in stages. You're talking about Ruchnius, it's conceptual stages.
But it's either one or the other. It's not both at the same.
I'm not sure what you mean.
In Ruchnius, is it both? Could it be both?
You talk constantly when Atzilus creates Bria, from Atzilus creates Bria. That's happening all the time. But there's a level of Atzilus, and there's a level of Atzilus goes down into Bria. And then there's how Bria is elevated into Atzilus, let's say on Shabbos. So I'm not clear what you're asking. This is a question about everything. What happens on Shabbos in the higher worlds? Lower levels elevate to higher levels, only on Shabbos, not on the weekdays. Or so you have this constantly, except above, time is conceptual rather than actual past, present, and future. Maybe I'm not understanding your question.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I never doubted. But I just wanted to know if one excludes the other. That's basically
I don't know. Excludes. It's different levels.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now the Rabbi Rashbi is going to continue and say and explain more this idea that moyach, the pnimis hakavana in moyach, and chachma, is also radiating in lev, in the heart. He says yesh lemer, and we could say shezeu gamkein de b'halachas de Torah.
Page
1248, middle of the page, the line that begins v'hu shakavana pnimis. And if anybody's looking for the pages in, if you want to follow the text and you don't have it, go to ayinbeis.com. You have a PDF of all these pages. On page 1248, the line that begins v'hu shakavana v'yesh lemer, and we can say shezeu gamkein de b'halachas de Torah. That when you're talking, he's going to give an example now. He's going to give another way that this expresses itself, or yesh lemer, that this expresses itself in the halachas to Torah. We're talking about when you're learning the halachas, the laws of Torah. Ta'atam hanigla shebehem hu mebchinas meichen hashayachim el hamidus. So when you look at halacha in Torah, let's say Hilchas Shabbos. So it talks about the Torah, it talks about what you're supposed to do, the lamates malachis you're not allowed to do, or other halachas in Torah, the hilchas of the halacha of tefillin or tzitzis. So there's a reason that's revealed to us in understanding why is that halacha that way. Like for example, Shabbos, the reason that's revealed to us is because our Eibishter rested on Shabbos. He created the world in 6 days, and then on the seventh day, and therefore we should too rest. Or same thing with other mitzvahs. So there's a reason that's revealed, and that reason comes from moichin, because moichin is reason. The halacha is the action. This is the law. But there's a reason that's revealed, and that reason, generally speaking, comes from moichin hashayachim el hamidus. They're not coming from the core, deepest levels of moichin. It's moichin as it speaks to the midas, to the emotions, and to the behavioral experience. So kamoshi is boyer, like he says, as shall be explained. So he's giving us a little taste of something that's going to come soon, a little later in Ayin Beis. Okay, so basically, when you learn, let's say you're teaching someone ben Eser leMishnah, a 10-year-old, you're learning Mishnayos. For what time do you begin to say Shema in the evening? As the Mishnah says, and then the Gemara elaborates. So someone who's learning Mishnah, or let's say Ben Chamesh Esel the Gemara, a 15-year-old, understands the basic reason for it. Is he getting the core, deepest reasons for this halacha? No. He's getting what's called Meichen Shayach L'Midas. Let me explain what that means. It's not just Meichen, because usually we think of intellect connects to emotions. It also means intellect as it relates to us. Remember, Midas is a relationship. Meichen is intellect. Intellect is a level above relationship. That's why you find, and Ayin Beis speaks about in many places in Chassidus, that when you're busy with your mind, actually a relationship disturbs you. If you're busy learning, for example, and someone comes over, wants to speak to you, even if someone you love, that's not going to allow you to be able to learn. In other words, moichin requires a certain being separate and detached from others. Midas is the exact opposite. Midas means connection. Ava, I love you. Yira, respect, awe, tiferes, and so on. So moichin, that's why it says in the Bar Mitzvah Maimer it's brought, Alpaim Shana Kodma Torah La'elam. 2,000 years before the world, the Torah precedes the world by 2,000 years. Now, obviously, there's no time. As I mentioned, it's conceptual. What's Alpayim? 2,000. Alef Chachachma, Alef Chabina. So, like he explains in the Bar Mitzvah Maimon, it's just an example. It's in many Maimorim, all the way back to the Alter Rebbe, that because Chachma and Bina is not involved in the creation, it's involved in higher than creation. So, it precedes creation. Where does creation come from? Elam Chesed Yibana. Like he continues, when the Eibishter says, "I want to do Chesed," and the two different interpretations what Chesed, what means Elam Chesed Yibana. Elam is connected to Chesed. Like the Chassidus also brings in the same Maimorim that Avraham Avinu, he was mitztayir he was in pain when he didn't see guests, because chesed needs someone else. You can't do chesed with yourself. You can't just do chesed. Learning Torah, using your mind, chachma and bina, you can do very well on your own. On the contrary, it's easier to do on your own. Midas requires another. So what does that mean in Ruchnius? That moichin and midas is more godliness in a conscious level. We're not talking about the supraconscious now. Conscious intelligence is the godliness that is planning existence, but it precedes, it's higher than existence. It's higher than the relationship. Midas is already a relationship. So now let's apply that to learning Torah. So when you're learning Torah, the halacha itself is of course midas, because that's what you're supposed to do. This is the mitzvah that Abraham says you should do. But he wants you to also have a reason, the reason behind it. So initially, when you learn halacha, the tam hanigla is the meichin hashayachim el midas. You don't know all the deeper secrets of what God's intention is behind it. Like I said yesterday in the example, that when you're busy building the house, you know some of the reasons of why this house is being built, but you don't know the depth and the inner workings of the mind of the architect. Or like when we spoke about artists, you see a piece of art, so you could see the moichin hashayachim el midas. You see the mind of the artist as it relates to this piece of art. But what are the deeper reasons that we don't have in the first stage? Then he says, comes the next step. However, Gadlus hu, and what is Gadlus hameichin and amidus? When it grows to a state of Gadlus, like we said, Gadlus Abba, is Gadlus hameichin the Abba that radiates in the midas. He says, "Hu shemeir behem haseid va'apnimius." That in these halachas, you're not just seeing the basic nigla reason, the reason al pi nigla, the revealed reason, but also in them is radiating the secret and the deeper, the seid shebetera. U'kamei Rashbi, like we see by Rashbi. Rab Shimon bar Yochai, of course, was both a Tana, a master in Talmud, in Gemara, in Mishnah, I should say, and also he was also Pnimius HaTorah, Zohar. Shebahalocha hagashmi ra es haseid apnimi. That in the physical halacha of whatever it may be, Shabbos, Kashrus, Tefillah, Mezuzah, Tzedakah, he saw the inner secret, k'moi b'Torah shalamayla, the way it is in the Torah above. Because remember, when the Torah came down below, we only have the outer dimension of it, with the surface level. But the Torah originates from the highest levels. So Rashbi was able to see in a very basic halacha, not just the revealed reasons, but the inner deeper workings behind this mitzvah, behind this halacha, I should say. So the Rebbe Rashab is with that demonstrating this higher level of Gadlus in a very tangible way. That it comes down to halacha, it's a deeper level that you see it's not just moyach shaykh lamidas, but you're getting the etzem moyach, the seid and primius. V'hainu, what does this mean? V'hainu, shaydei avedose, through the aved of Rashbi. How did he get to this level? Through his aveda, be'etzem neshama, through his work in the core of his neshama. Remember, b'chol meidecha touches the core of the soul, and it's negei b'nefesh. And it's negei b'nefesh, even the moichin was elevated to a level of atzmius. So what is the aveda be'etzem neshama? In the words of the Rashbi, the last day of his life, he said, "The bechad katirna is katarno," with one bond, with one connection, is katana. I connect with you from the word kteris, that you become completely bound to the Eibishter. So chad katiris katana is referred to a very high level that Rashbi reached, even though here saying that this is through his aveda throughout his entire life, but the ultimate was reached at the end of his life, when he was ready, his neshama was ready to go up. B'chad katiris katarna. Katirna is katarna, he says. Sometimes it says katira. Shezeu ha'ava de b'chol meidecha. This is a ava, not b'chol levavcha, which is based on rational, based on the mind, or b'chol nafscha, that also impacts all the faculties. But it's an ava that's l'mayla me hagbala, higher than limits and higher than the containers of our faculties. So by a Rashbi reaching such a level of ava b'chol meidecha, b'chad katirna is katarna, himshir b'chines meichin da gadlus b'teira. He drew down Moichin the Gadlus in Torah, not just the revealed dimension of the reasons, but Moichin the Gadlus that say them previous in Torah, to see Torah not just as a book of wisdom and laws that have a wisdom behind them, but also Gadlus HaMeichin, or Gadlus Abba. Okay. So this Yesh Leimer definitely adds, and you see one place that it manifests, where you could have two stages, and here we have a perfect example of these two stages. Halachas, as we see the Nigla, the revealed reasons, or through the Aveda B'chol Me'idecha that elevates the mind of the Torah, that you see the deeper secrets, so to speak, within, or actually not so to speak, he actually says it, to say this within the Torah. So like if you learned Kuntas in Yonashal Torah Chassidus, where the Rebbe explains Moida Ani and Pshat Remez Drush Sod, and then Al Chassidus, you see it right there. There's Moida Ani on a basic level. We say thank you to Hashem, gratitude. Like when you make a bracha, thank you. It's a logical reason. You make a bracha and say, thank you, blessed me with life, so I say thank you. I acknowledge and give gratitude for giving me Achzata b'nishmasi, or Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Pokeach ivrim, malbish arumim. He opened the eyes of the blind, that you've given me life, you've given me resources, you've given me faculties. Or Birchas hanenim, when you make Birchas on food. Shakal niya b'dvari, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Shakal niya b'dvari, B'er minim b'zeinis, B'er minei, B'er pri adama, B'er hameitzi lechem min haaretz, etc., etc. So everyone understands this halacha. Why? It's the appropriate thing that when you're blessed with something, say thank you. But then you learn deeper, and you go deeper, and when a person gets more connected to godliness, they start appreciating that's much more than that. And by making a bracha, you also reveal and elevate the sparks within the food. That's already a more premium-dik explanation. And as a person climbs in their relationship with God, any halacha, any mitzvah can be done on a very basic behavioral level with, yes, a level of intelligence. Like we said, Ibur Yunik Moichin or Mutva Murgish Muzgul, you can do it behaviorally. You can teach a child to make a blessing and they don't even know the reason yet. Or they do know the reason. And then in the reason itself, you can go deeper and deeper. When a person is completely enraptured with godliness, then their Moichin is reaching the highest levels of Gadlus HaMeichin. And the Meichin the Gadlus is being nimshach in Torah through that deep love of Ava, like what he called here, Chat Katirnis Katarna. And now it can have a complete deeper and understanding how it is on God's level, not just on a basic level, gratitude. Like in a sense, understanding why why this mitzvah is why God gave us this mitzvah. Now again, we know that there's also the levels we learned earlier, Chachmas Tema, that are beyond our understanding altogether. And that's usually revealed in times of tragedy, like with Rabbi Akiva, like we learned earlier, that we have no way to fathom. It completely defies logic. Why a tzaddik and a Tana like Rabbi Akiva should be dying so barbarically, should be killed so barbarically. But that means it doesn't mean there's no reason. It means we don't know the reason. So there's a level where we know a reason, a deeper reason. There's a level we know a somewhat that there's a deep reason. Then there's levels that are completely defy our logic. That's why he's called it metzach, if you remember. Metzach means it conceals, it covers up. Like the forehead does not reveal the mind behind the forehead, so too the metzach of arich conceals the tam komus, the hidden reason behind it. But there is some experience of it. He's not going into the details how much the level of experience of it is, but clearly Chachma and Bina, when they're on their lower level, when Bina is involved with the emotions, and Chachma is on its level, so then it's an intellect that's not really gazing at Metzach of Arich, so you're not really seeing the deeper hidden reasons. So Bina, you can learn something on a very basic level and explain it to the children, to the young, to the emotions. But then there comes the next stage of maturation where the midas have become so elevated to point to b'chol me'idecha, that you completely consume that God, you can't exist without him. Then the meichin work very differently. then they're not focused on understanding. They're then focused on experiencing the divine in the highest levels. And in this case, the levels that are what he calls the Seid and Pnimius of the inner dimensions. So you really have here is a deeper understanding in general, what's the mila of Seid Shebet Torah. It's not just another dimension of Torah. It's another dimension of godliness in the Torah. And Rashbi achieved that through his Aved. So we have here a manifestation of these levels in this Yeshlema that he just explained. Before I continue, does anybody have any questions? Because now he's going to go back to the next stage, because now we only covered Meichen and Midas. What happens after Midas? How is that energy drawn down all the way to us? That has not yet been determined. So we'll soon get to that next. But let me stop for questions or clarity if anybody wants me to clarify. No questions? Okay. Good. So now, if you recall, I want to refer you back to this page. When he said on page 1236 that in order for there to be the Mshach of Meichen de Gadlus Bezah, it's a very critical line there that connects everything we're learning now. We're on page 1248, that's 1236. So we're talking about 12 pages back. So he said that in order for there to be the Mshach of Meichen de Gadlus Bezah, you need another tzarich liyis yichud achanayla b'fnei atzmei, and that's the zivuk shalom of Chacham and Bina that we spoke about and discussed now at length. But then, if you remember, he said when you have zivuk shalom and the yichud pnimi of Abba ve'ima, yeah. So he said there that when you have that, I just want to read the line. That kasha yichud Abba ve'ima, I'm reading from on page 1236, top third of the page. He said, when there's the yichud of Avim, a zivug shalim in a complete union, os kol ikim mitzias azivug hu loses meichen gemurim de Gadlus el zun dat silus lehelid neshamas chadashes. That all the primary union is there to draw, to transmit, or let's say to transfer. Meichen gemurim de Gadlus. These are the words he uses there. The complete meichen of Gadlus that we're referring to now. El zun, which is Zah and Malchus. Datzilis, Lahelid neshamas chadashes, to give birth to new neshamas. Remember, that piece came because he was telling us that it's not just that you get the natural emotions, but you also can transform and create something new, a new energy. Bina alone can't do that. That has to come from Chachma. But then it also needs this Yichud Shalom, the Zivug Shalom, and that allows for the creation of new neshamas. Avlu biyesa zivug loish de loish shalom, ein koyer bezeh zivug hatacht de loses meichen lezun, rak b'seid yinike belvad. But when the zivug is not complete, this unity below does not have the power to draw all that meichen into Zah and Malchus, and it's only a sod yinika, meaning it's also only nursing, only a narrow flow enters there. That's what he said back on page 1236. Okay. So you see from this, one second. And then he continues. I just want to sum this up because I think it's very relevant to understand what we're going to learn now. Then he says, now, the difference between these two types of yichud, shalom and not shalom, complete and not complete, on 1236, he says, yichud chitzeni yavava, then the air only comes from the energy that was already measured and commensurate. He says, "Shekvar nimdad b'seder ishtalshus." Ve'ein b'zeh shum ischatshus. In other words, is the energy that God allocated to create existence, and there's nothing new about it. God allocated a certain amount of energy, and now you're revealing it through that yichud chitzeni. There's no ischatshus. You're drawing down from concealed to revealed. You're not creating anything new. The yichud pnimi, however, creates a completely new energy that was not there in the source. So in a sense, when God created existence, he allocated a certain amount of energy, but through our avodah, we don't just reveal the energy that was allocated and bring it out into from potential to actual, from the concealed to revealed. We actually draw a completely new, unprecedented energy. And that's the Yichud Pnimi. And then he said, from the Likutei Torah, that he says, Likutei Torah ba'abir v'nigdashti, the Yichud Avah, this Yichud of Chachma Bin, eina pirush hamshachim Abba v'Ima levad. This doesn't mean it's coming only from Abba v'Ima. It's not just that Chachma and Bina have the power. Ela Abba v'Ima makablim mekeser. Abba v'Ima are receiving from Keser, Arich and Atik. B'chinas Arich Amfim v'Keser ma'atik ad ein sof atzmus hamaitzel. So basically, Chachma and Bina, in their complete union, are drawing from Keser, from all the way rooted to the ein sof atzmus hamaitzel, which allows you to receive more energy than just which was allocated. What was allocated exists already in Chachma and Bina. But we're talking about reaching a deeper core level. That needs to have a yichud shalom, a zivug shalom, and we learn now that is part of the whole b'chol ma'odcha process that leads to that zivug shalom, because it's the midas as they mature and grow that create that type of deep connection and love for God. That's negei b'nefesh, that you can't exist without it, which in turn causes Bina to elevate, to stand side by side with Chachma, and in turn causing them both to gaze at Arich and Keser, and all the way drawing from Atzmus Ein Sof, new energy that was not there just in what was allocated. So he says now, a second. Yeah. So it's higher than the Lifnei Tzimtzum, he says, that was allocated for existence. This is coming from a higher place. Pnimius atik va'arich u'pnimius avo va'avo gofu ha'yichud b'pnimius chachma shebehem. And there he says clearly that this is number one, is Amshachas Atzmus in the pnimius of Chachma and Bina, and the Chachma Bina itself, it's the yichud b'pchinas chachma shebehem. The yichud of Bina being side by side with Chachma, and a higher level is that they're receiving from Arich and Atik and all the way to the highest levels. Yeah. He brings there as well that in Eitz Chaim it says that Zivug, that's not complete, comes from Bina of Chachma and Bina, and of Abba v'Ima, and Zivug Shalom is from the Chachma within in Abba v'Ima. So that's another distinction. Yeah, okay. Now, so what do you need now in order for there to be the birth of a new level?
That Chochma is much higher. When there is a zivug shlim, then the Chochma penetrates also in the Bina, but the Chochma is always in a deeper source for the whole entire thing.
Yeah, that's obvious. Chochma is always is Chochma and Bina, yeah.
Rabbi Jacobson, when the Rebbe's writing here, Neshamas Chadashus, is he referring to like this elite level for like the Alter Rebbe, or is it talking about just bringing down a new neshama, a new child, actual child into the world? For that, this is available for all Jews, or just only for people that can actually bring down a neshama Chadashus?
It's a good question. Initially, I would say that this is referring to yes, like a neshama chadasha, like the Alter Rebbe. But the key thing to remember is he's not talking here so much how it is lamata. He's talking how it is lamaila. So basically, you could say on a lower level, meaning how the Alter Rebbe came at neshama chadasha, that came from a zivuk shalim, whereas other neshamas that were already here on this earth just are returning to finish the job. So by nature, that's coming from a different level above, because the neshama was already here. You did not need a new revelation. You need the neshama to be born again, but it's continuing a journey that was there already. Whereas a neshama chadash like the Alter Rebbe has a mission to bring a new gili chadash, something new into the world. Chassidus Chabad, Shnei Zalman, the Shnei Eir. So that would be how it manifests. But the context that he's saying it here is Eitz Chaim. He's talking about how it is in the root, how the shamas are created in Atzilus through the yichud of Chachma and Bina, which, yes, manifests in this difference that I just said. He's not talking specifically necessarily about neshamas chadashas as they come down below, but it doesn't exclude it either, because it ultimately has to happen up in that level. Generally speaking, in Ishtalshlus, when you talk about a different yichudim, that some yichud draws down energy, but it's not completely new energy. And then there's those that yichud that creates a new energy, is what he's addressing here. But as I said, it could be applied to the Alter Rebbe as well, and to what we learn about neshamas chadashas. But the key thing to remember is that is it a new unprecedented energy? Or is it something that is there, that was there and just is being revealed or continuing the journey as I just explained? Now, okay, clear?
But I would think that if there's these two levels of zivug she'eno shalom and zivug shalom, that this level of zivug shalom would be such an exalted level of when a person would be such a level with it. And we're talking about physically with people, Jews, that they would be so, they'd have to be on such an exalted level to achieve this yichud shalom, that almost 99.9% of the people, and whatever, are at a level of yichud she'eno b'shalom. And does that level she'eno b'shalom still bring down this highest that is above structure and above after Tzimtzum, before they can reach higher than Tzimtzum for this? Tzimtzum, bringing down or is it only, can we only access the people that have she'eno shalom, measured access that God has already given into this world for us, so to speak?
Well, it's like, can we be tzaddik? In Tanya, he says that a person cannot be a tzaddik; they can only be a beinoni, and it's only possible that God, the ilus that we can have, ula yarav, the Eibishter can send a neshama of a tzaddik into a person, but we can't achieve that on our own. It's a similar question. If we could only be a beinoni, we can't be a tzaddik, so we can't draw down what a tzaddik draws down. On the other hand, the kavanah that God wants is for us to be beinonim, not tzaddikim. That's why he didn't create us as tzaddikim. The idea of a neshama chadasha like the Alter Rebbe is exactly as the name implies. It's a very rare thing. It doesn't happen every day. There are times in history where the Eibishter wants that. So, but that's not to minimize the Aveda that we have, because number one, we in every person, according to their identity, has to come to a level, number one, b'chol avavcha, b'chol nafshecha, and also b'chol ma'adecha. Remember, it says in Chassidus, b'chol ma'adecha is ma'od shelcha. Everybody has, in their own, relatively speaking, a level where they can go beyond themselves. And when they go beyond, God sends them something beyond as well. In other words, if you do your Aveda only as much as you're naturally capable of, and you don't push yourself to another level, like he says in chapter 15 in Tanya, you learn 100 times. In the time of Shas, they review the Gemara, the Mishnah that they learned 100 times, whatever they learn. If you don't go to that 101, you're not going to get that bleak vul energy. So relatively speaking, each of us, if we give tzedakah, let's say 10%, and then we add an 11%, or we give a certain amount, then we add a little more. So relatively to us, it says, Ma'od shalcha, reaches the Ma'od Amiti because for you, it was beyond your natural capacity. And yet, you talk about a Rebbe or a Tzaddik, clearly their level of Bli Gvul is going to be far deeper, and their drawing down an Er Chadash is going to be a much higher level. So relatively speaking, we also have these levels. The level of doing things based on structure. Then when you reach a higher level of love and connection, you can get something that's beyond. You go beyond your structure and you reveal something beyond the structure of existence. So that would be the general answer. Now, the second point I would make here is that remember that we are all one people. So our Aveda is also accumulative. We carry all the Aveda that our parents and grandparents, all the way back to Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, who did all these levels of Aveda to Mesiras Nefesh, is also part of our being. So everyone has their role to play. So when you accumulate it all together and Mashiach comes, so everyone's going to play their part, and together, collectively, we're going to experience the Er Chadash, even the true Er Chadash of the highest level, of the greatest level that we're talking about here. In context of the Maimer here, of the Hemshech here, the point the Rebbe Rashab wants to make, he's not really trying to exclude anybody. He's trying to lay out the map of Avodah, the levels of how far we can reach. So clearly, most of us are not on this level. This doesn't mean that relative to us, we can't reach this level. As I discussed, all this can be translated to each one of us according to your state of being. Everyone is different where you are. So this is really just a picture. This is not a black and white like formula. Okay, here are the people that create neshamas chadashas, here are those that don't. This really is accessible to all, but everything relative to a person's work. Well, this is why we learn all these stories we hear. That one person who, let's say, didn't learn any Torah all his life, but he makes that effort and he says, Aleph, Kametz, Aleph, Ah. That can reach higher levels than the biggest Talmid Chacham who knows the whole Shas, because this person has gone out of their comfort zone. They've done something, like a Tinnik Shenishba, when the Russian Jews, Simchas Torah, and they didn't even know how to say a prayer. They just say Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. You can imagine what levels it pierces in heaven. Why? Even though if you measure it purely on a scale, how can you compare that to a Baki B'Shas who sits and learns Torah all day and so on? Because relative to them, they did something that is a qualitative paradigm shift, which is why we say a Tinuk Shenishba or a Karkafta, someone who never put on tefillin, puts on tefillin once. There's something that happens in whole Seder Shtashlis, like a Er Chadash, that a person who puts on every day doesn't achieve usually. Now, you could achieve it if you also do it with that intensity, just like a Baal Tshuva has that deeper thirst because he's creating something new. Whereas a person who's a tzaddik, as great as he is, he's still drawing the energy that was more or less measured and he's revealing it. So my point is that everybody in their avodah can find somewhere where they draw an Er Chadash. And it's not so black and white. Obviously, this does not mean that every person, every couple comes together and they're intimate, they're going to bring an Neshama Chadash like the Alter Rebbe. You need the Eibishter to choose that. And it's not just the parents. It's not a thing. You need the Hashem says, I want to send a Neshama Chadash into this world. And he chooses the right family to send it to. Like Baal Shem Tov knew that a child like that is going to be born. But I want to stay away from the literal, actual human beings, but more in Avodah, the idea of drawing new energy. So the Fiyerach, each one of us has both elements. B'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshcha generally is drawing energy into the system from the root of the system, but it's still what's measured and allocated in the system. It's still a big thing because you're filling your heart and your being with avahaftas Hashem Elokecha. But then b'chol meidecha, each of us say it every day, several times a day. That tells us that we could reach a level that's beyond the chol levavcha b'chol nafshecha. And when you do that, to some extent, there's an Er Chadash. Now, obviously, it requires work and it's all effort. So that's the general way I would discuss it. Like in many things, we are not tzaddikim, but that doesn't mean we don't have somewhere b'zoyer ampin in some microcosmic way certain elements that have the power like of a higher neshama.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I got it. When you said ma'od shelcha, now I understand it. It's obviously relative. It obviously applies to everybody if they can go to ma'od on their level. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
That was wonderful, by the way, Rabbi. Eliezer, you got an answer to your question and then some.
Okay, thank you.
That was a great answer. That was terrific.
You
Thank
said, Reb Simon, you said that this is only in Hashem, not in the parents, but it's much more from here that when you have zivug shlim, then this is lohoilid neshamas chadashas. So the zivug shlim has nothing to do with us; it's only with the Gilo and Mermailo.
First of all, zivug shlim here in Eitz Chaim is most likely not talking about human beings. He's talking about Abba ve'Ima and Atzilus. Down below, look, in Sof Perek Aleph of Tanya, it's very clear that the parents have a role, but they don't have a role in the Etzem and Neshama. Their role is only in the Levush, Nefesh HaSichlis.
Yeah, Sof Perek Beis.
Yeah, Sof Perek Beis, sorry, yeah, Sof Perek Beis. So it's clear that of course, that the Kedushas HaTashmish, like he says there, the Kavonis, have an impact, but they don't have an impact on the Chelik Elikam Mimal and the deeper levels of the soul. Let's put it this way. Even if you have two tzaddikim, a tzaddik and a tzidkonius, who are nazivuk shalom in their aveda, you always need a third partner. The Eibishter has to want to send an neshama chadasha. So I don't know if it's just an automatic thing. And secondly, maybe more importantly, maybe the Eibishter doesn't let them have a zivuk shalom unless he wants them to have. It's in other words, it's not what they're going to do. Is the time ready for such a zivug? And it's not like there's a chesed in a zivug the loy shalom or loy shlim. You say shlim or shalom?
Shlim. In Aramaic, it's shlim. In Lashon Kodesh, it's shalom.
Okay.
Zivug shalom, zivug shlim.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's completely like that. It's just like it says in Zohar that when a couple join together, even if they don't have a child, the neshamas are created in heaven. That's why even after this talks about Avram and Sarah, this week's parsha is coming, that Avram and Sarah, even when they were beyond the age of having children, their yichud was not a waste. It creates neshamas above. The question is whether the neshama will come down below. So it could very well be also that a zivug shlim or shalom below creates a neshama chadash above, but the Eibusha doesn't send it down below. It's also possible. In other words, it creates amshach chadasha. But this, I have to look in Eitz Chaim to see how literal he's talking. Is there actually, the next question you could ask is, so how do you create a zivug shalom? What's the difference in when husband and wife come together in a sacred way? Is there something they do differently if it's a zivug shalom or not shalom? That I don't know. I didn't look in Eitz Chaim. My understanding here that it was all talking more in Atzilus and the Ruchnius and Yonim, but I'm sure that's what this Reishis Chochmah and Eitz Chaim and other Svarim they talk about. What means kiddush hazivug, and how you sanctify a zivug to make sure that it's more complete. But that I'm not so familiar with right now. I'd have to look up what that means in Gashmias, if it indeed has certain guidelines. So there's still hope for all of you. Maybe you can still be mamshech and neshama chadasha.
But it's also like a quantum. It's like a chain reaction. It's higher than matter, higher than normal. That it brings down like stuff that you didn't have. It's amazing.
Well, this is like this is spoken about in a number of places. If you look in the beginning of Samach Vav, he says it explicitly. He asked the question: since the Eir Ein Sof filled all reality, and the Tzimtzum concealed it, so what do we accomplish afterwards when we bring Eir into the world, into the Cholol Amokim Panei that was left, the space that was left because of the Tzimtzum? What's the Chiddush? Nothing was accomplished. It's like you took the water out of the cup and then you just put it back into the cup. So you drew the energy out of the space and the left an independent consciousness to emerge, which is existence, and then you're just drawing it back down again. And he answers two answers. He says the first answer is, the Chiddush is that it's coming now into Kalim. Before the Tzimtzum, there was no room for existence. Now the Chiddush is not, the Oyer is the same Oyer, but the Oyer is now being received. It would be like the teacher who conceals his mind, his intelligence, in order to teach a beginner. The Chiddush is that now the beginner is now able to access this intelligence that before would not, if the teacher had not concealed, the student would never been able to exist. That's answer number one, but he's not satisfied with that answer because that answer only answers that it's relative to the recipient. The Eir itself remains the same. Then he says, no, that through avodah, you draw an energy that wasn't even there before the tzimtzum. Eir chadash, that even the energy before the tzimtzum that was concealed, because that energy, remember, was already, God envisioned in that energy and allocated the energy, the resources to existence. That you draw an energy, Eir habligvul, that was not even there in any revealed way, lifnei tzimtzum, the Eir chadash. And you need both, because you need to fill the expanse of existence, like we spoke about in volume 1. The oves they basically cleaned up the pipes that were polluted and contaminated by the sins, starting from Chet Eitzadas, and reconnected existence to its divine source. But they didn't draw new energy. They brought it back to the way it was before Eitzadas. And by Matan Torah came a new energy, Eir Chodesh Mamish. Similar to what we say Rosh Hashanah. Every day the world is renewed, every second. So what's the Chiddush of Rosh Hashanah? So the Talta Rebbe says in Siman Yudalad and Ageres HaKedesh, that's a Eir Chodesh and Mechudesh Shaloi Hoya Me'elam. It would never, a new energy enters. Not just the same energy being renewed, but a new, completely new, unprecedented energy and possibilities come in Rosh Hashanah. So basically you're going to find in Chassidus all the time, are we drawing down the energy that's there, or are we revealing another, or revealing something new? Example, bracha and tefillah. See this, what's the difference between a blessing and a prayer? You come to a tzaddik and you ask him for a blessing. You come to a tzaddik, you ask him to pray for you. It's very different. When Yaakov was blessing Ephraim and Menashe, that was a blessing. That's why Chassidus asked the question, why didn't he just draw the whatever bracha he was going to give to Ephraim, he should give to Menashe? Because it was a bracha, and a bracha can only reveal what belongs to you. Yaakov knew these gifts belong to Ephraim, so all he could do, that's why he crossed his hands, and he didn't say, you know what, let me transfer that energy to the firstborn. Because a bracha only reveals that which is already there, just waiting, that you need the bracha to be able to access it, or the bracha to be able to actualize it. It comes into a reality. That's why there's a bracha. Tefillah, Chassidus says, is yehi rotzin, that even if a person, God forbid, is sick, and God is already destined that maybe this person will be taken, we say yehi rotzin, we say, God, create a new rotzin. We want an Eir Chadash and change the destiny of the person. So tefillah has the power to actually create something new. Bracha, the mila of bracha is it's more guaranteed because it's already been allocated. Tefillah is not guaranteed. God could say yes, he could say no. On the other hand, the mila of tefillah is that it brings something new. The Rebbe explains, my Morich Chassidus explains, and the Rebbe brings it many times in the Erev Yom Kippur bracha, that Birchas Koyanim has both milas, the mila of a bracha and the mila of a tefillah. That's why we say it in davening, in the morning. But it's also a bracha, Birchas Koyanim, but it's also a prayer. So it has both qualities together. Anyway, just one more example of these two dimensions of chidush and revealing that which is there in store already, which is a big topic. Also, Rosh Hashanah, they say, designates parnasa for the entire year. But then we say every day we daven for that. Why? She explains this in the Maimorim and Kunter Samayin in many places. One is Gilei Helam and one is Eir Chadash. You could always draw something new. But there's also drawing that which was already allocated. You want to make sure it comes down from heaven and there are no obstacles to get that which you deserve. But then you ask for things even beyond what you deserve or beyond what was allocated for you. It's discussed in these Maimarim, but I don't want to digress too much. I was going to read the next line, but I'll stop here. The next line was going to be going back, because Neshama Chadasha, let me just preface, and tomorrow we'll learn it. Neshama Chadasha is not created, is created by Yichud, Zah, and Malchus, is what creates the Neshamas Chadashas that go into Biyah. So even though Chacham and Bina give birth to Midas, but when you need something new, you need Zah and Malchus. So now he's going to explain what happens to Malchus when you reach the level of Gadlus Abba, or Gadlus HaMeichin. Till now, we've been speaking that the emotions have now been, that the Ava B'chol Meidecha has reached the highest levels of the moichin, the Gadlus, and that Gadlus came down into Zah. Now we're going to talk about what happens to Malchus. But we need more time, so I'm going to explain that. We'll learn that tomorrow. So I'm going to stop here.